Resident Care and Services Manual Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy Page, 1 of 8 Original Date, December, 2017 Approved by, Executive Director Revised Date, February, 2019. Standard. 1. All residents will be treated with dignity and respect by staff. Abuse or neglect of a resident is not tolerated and staff will fulfill their moral and legal obligation to report any incident or suspected incident of resident abuse and neglect. 2. Residents will have their rights protected and respected at all times. Staff will receive education and training on the Residents' Bill of Rights and methods to prevent resident abuse or neglect. 3. The home has zero tolerance for abuse or neglect. All allegations of abuse and neglect will be promptly reported, investigated, and based on outcome of the investigation, progressive discipline may take place up to and including discharge. 4. Abuse of residents by any person and neglect of residents by the staff or licensee will not be tolerated, and any allegation will be investigated immediately and actions taken to prevent reoccurrence. Examples of abuse: Black circle, unauthorized use of physical force or restraint. Striking a resident. Black circle, handling a resident roughly or administering a treatment roughly. Black circle, the infliction of mental cruelty, e.g. loss of dignity, threats, invasion of privacy, degrading infantilization. Black circle, sexual harassment or molestation. Verbal abuse and / or other forms of communication which threatens the resident, causes annoyance or discomfort and for which there is no therapeutic value. Black circle, financial abuse, e.g. theft, extortion, or irregularities in handling residents' financial affairs, borrowing residents' property. Black circle, any form of punishment directed at a resident. Resident Care and Services Manual Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy Approved by, Executive Director Page, 2 of 8 Original Date, December, 2017 Revised Date, February, 2019. Examples of neglect. Staff neglect, whether intentional or not, is a form of abuse, e.g. delaying response to a resident's call, leaving a resident in soiled linen, feeding hurriedly, not feeding, not providing meals, restraining unduly or for the convenience of the staff, ignoring or isolating a resident for the convenience of the staff. Definitions of abuse. The Home defines abuse in the same manner as the definitions provided in the LCA and Regulation 79/10, which is as follows. 1. For the purposes of the definition of abuse in subsection 2(1) of the Act. Emotional abuse means a. Any threatening, insulting, intimidating, or humiliating gestures, actions, behavior or remarks, including imposed social isolation, shunning, ignoring, lack of acknowledgement or infantilization that are performed by anyone other than a resident, or b. Any threatening or intimidating gestures, actions, behavior, or remarks by a resident that causes alarm or fear to another resident where the resident performing the gestures, actions, behavior or remarks understands and appreciates their consequences, mauvais traitement d'ordre effectif. Financial abuse means any misappropriation or misuse of a resident's money or property, exploitation financière. Physical abuse means, subject to subsection 2, a. The use of physical force by anyone other than a resident that causes physical injury or pain. b. Administering or withholding a drug for an inappropriate purpose, or c. The use of physical force by a resident that causes physical injury to another resident, mauvais traitement d'ordre physique. Resident Care and Services Manual Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy Page, 3 of 8 Original Date, December, 2017 Approved by, Executive Director Revised Date, February 2019. Sexual abuse means a. Subject to subsection 3, any consensual or non-consensual touching, behavior or remarks of a sexual nature or sexual exploitation that is directed towards a resident by a licensee or staff member, or b. Any non-consensual touching, behavior or remarks of a sexual nature or sexual exploitation directed towards a resident by a person other than a licensee or staff member, mauvais traitement d'ordre sexuel. Verbal abuse means a. Any form of verbal communication of a threatening or intimidating nature or any form of verbal communication of a belittling or degrading nature which diminishes a resident's sense of well-being, dignity or self-worth, that is made by anyone other than a resident, or b. Any form of verbal communication of a threatening or intimidating nature made by a resident that leads another resident to fear for his or her safety where the resident making the communication understands and appreciates its consequences. Mauvais traitement d'ordre verbal. OREG 79/10, S2, 1. 2. For the purposes of Clause A of the definition of physical abuse in subsection 1, physical abuse does not include the use of force that is appropriate to the provision of care or assisting a resident with activities of daily living, unless the force used is excessive in the circumstances. OREG 79/10, S2, 2. 3. For the purposes of the definition of sexual abuse in subsection 1, sexual abuse does not include a. Touching, behavior or remarks of a clinical nature that are appropriate to the provision of care or assisting a resident with activities of daily living, or b. Consensual touching, behavior or remarks of a sexual nature between a resident and a licensee or staff member that is in the course of a sexual relationship that began before the resident was admitted to the long-term care home or before the licensee or staff member became a licensee or staff member. OREG 79/10, S2, 3. Resident Care and Services Manual. Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy page, 4 of 8 original date, December, 2017 approved by, Executive Director revised date, February 2019. Procedure. A. Prevention of abuse or neglect. 1. On orientation all staff, as defined in the Act which includes new employees, persons under contract with the home and persons who work at the home pursuant to a contract or agreement between the home and an agency or third party, are given education on the Residents' Bill of Rights. A copy of the Residents' Bill of Rights, Resident Abuse or Neglect Policy and the Duty to Report document is given to staff. 2. On orientation staff receives training on the relationship between power imbalances between staff and residents and the potential for abuse and neglect by those in a position of trust, power, and responsibility for resident care. 3-4. Annually, all staff receives education on the promotion and protection of the Residents' Bill of Rights, abuse prevention, and the Resident Abuse or Neglect Policy and applicable provisions in the Act and regulation as they relate to abuse and neglect of residents. 5. Staff receives education on communication with residents, and management of responsive and other behaviors and approaches in managing responsive and other behaviors. 6. Feedback from quality improvement activities from residents and clients is used to educate and promote staff awareness in protecting resident rights. 7. Individual counseling at the home level and referrals to external agencies for counseling services are used by the home to minimize stress. On orientation, the staff receives training on situations that may lead to abuse and neglect and how to avoid such situations. B. When resident abuse or neglect is suspected. 1. On becoming aware of abuse or neglect, suspected abuse or neglect, the person first having knowledge of this shall immediately inform the director at the MALC, the administrator, or if not available, the director of nursing or delegate. Resident Care and Services Manual Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy approved by, Executive Director page, 5 of 8 original date, December, 2017 revised date, February 2019 if the person implicated in the abuse or neglect, or suspected abuse or neglect of a resident is an employee of the home, a staff under a contract with the home, or person who work at the home pursuant to a contract between the home and an agency or a third party. 1, 2, 3. Where abuse or neglect, or an incident of suspected abuse or neglect occurs, The implicated staff shall immediately be suspended with pay from active duty pending further investigation with the possibility of discipline or discharge to follow. If the staff member is under contract with an agency or third party, the home notifies the agency or third party and the staff is removed from the home until the investigation is completed and a decision made based on the results of the investigation. 4. A date and time should be set for a discussion of the incident with the implicated employee, and, if applicable, the employee's union steward should be notified. 5. The supervisor or the person discovering the abuse should prepare a written report, suspected abuse/neglect report, containing at a minimum the following information. The home must inform the implicated staff about the allegation as quickly as possible and investigate it immediately while witnesses are readily available. The home ensures to safeguard the resident. If a resident has been physically abused, the registered staff contacts the physician. If the resident sustained physical injuries, the attending physician on call shall examine the resident as soon as possible and a medical report prepared. The registered staff documents the communication with the physician and outcome, of the discussion. What occurred? When it occurred? Who was involved, including witnesses? Where it occurred and the names of those in the vicinity who may be witnesses. Written statements from witnesses and residents. Tape recorder may be used for those unable to write. Any other significant information pertaining to the incident. 6. The administrator or director of nursing must inform the substitute decision maker, or other person, of significance to the resident of the incident and immediate action, taken. The administrator or director of nursing must notify Ministry of Health and Long-Term Resident Care and Services Manual. Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy Page, 6 of 8 approved by, Executive Director 7. 8 9. 10. 11 12. 13 Original date, December, 2017 Revised date, February 2019 Care Branch, and the Vice President of Operations. Section 24, 1, of the LCHA, requires that a person who has reasonable grounds to suspect that abuse of a resident by anyone or neglect of a resident by the licensee or staff that resulted in harm or risk to the resident shall immediately report the suspicion and information in which is based to the director. The administrator or director of nursing immediately initiates an investigation to determine if the alleged reported abuse or neglect can be substantiated. The investigation must include but not be limited to interviewing the following: the person, reporting the alleged abuse/neglect, and obtaining a written statement b. The alleged victim, and obtaining written statement, c. The alleged perpetrator, and written statements. Implicated employee, is/are entitled to union representation, d. All witnesses and obtaining written statements. The police shall be notified by the administrator or designate of any alleged, suspected, witnessed incident of abuse or neglect of a resident as soon as the administrator or designate suspects may constitute a criminal offense. The administrator or director of nursing must conduct second interviews of the key witnesses, alleged victim, and alleged perpetrator, as determined, to ask additional questions or to review information provided during the first interview. The second interviews must start as soon as the first round of interviews is completed. Where applicable, the director of nursing will report the incident to the staff member's professional association. If the allegation of abuse is supported, the administrator or director of nursing will communicate this information to the vice president of operations, and set up a meeting with the implicated employee, with union representation and employment is terminated. During the investigation, the administrator or director of nursing maintains communication with the victim, resident, and/or substitute decision maker, MALC, and the police, and once a decision is reached, the administrator or director of nursing notifies the victim and/or substitute decision maker, the MALC, of the decision. With all incidents of abuse or neglect, alleged or confirmed, Resources will be made available to assist the alleged or confirmed abused resident and the person responsible for. Resident Care and Services Manual. Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy approved by Executive Director 14. Page 7 of 8. Original date, December 2017. Revised date, February 2019. The alleged or confirmed abuse. The Social Services Coordinator is available to provide support to the resident. The Social Services Coordinator will determine in collaboration with the resident and/or substitute decision maker the need for additional counseling services. The person, implicated may be referred to an Employee Assistance Program, EAP, or to external counseling services. The LCA places a duty on practitioners and other, Section 24(4) of the LCA, to report allegations of abuse or neglect to the Director. If the person implicated in the abuse or alleged abuse of a resident is not staff as defined in the Act, family, visitor, volunteer, or others, the home, 1, 2, 3. The administrator or designate notifies the person, implicated and requests that he/she do not return to the home until the investigation is completed and a decision is made based on the results of the investigation. The administrator or designate sets up an appointment with the implicated person, and interviews the person, that have been implicated. The Director of Mulch needs to be informed immediately and the police shall be notified by the administrator or designate as soon as it is suspected that the abuse may constitute a criminal offense. The administrator or designate immediately initiates an investigation following the procedures noted in this policy. Outcome, 1, 2. All residents will be treated with dignity and respect and will be protected from abuse and neglect. All reports of alleged or actual abuse or neglect will be immediately reported to the Director at the MALC, Administrator and/or Director of Nursing, and an investigation will commence immediately. Additional references. 1. Residents' Bill of Rights. 2. LCA 2007 and Regulation 79/10. Resident Care and Services Manual. Section, Resident Rights Index ID, P-10 Subject, Abuse or Neglect Policy. Page 8 of 8. Original date, December 2017. Approved by Executive Director. Revised date, February 2019. 3. Duty to Report Poster.